Classical Greek scholars have suggested that there are three types of love, or three words for love in the Greek language, which would represent three different types of love. Agape, which would represent the love associated with God, or for the pagans, the gods. Phileo, which would be the friendship between human beings, and eros, which would be the love between a man and a woman. And some scholars, not so common nowadays, but it's still a popular idea that circulates, have tried to suggest that we could find this distinction in a conversation between Jesus and Peter in John chapter 21. In this understanding, Jesus starts by using agape, but because Peter replies using phileo, Jesus downgrades the love that he expects from Peter, and then the final question uses the word phileo, and that is what distresses Peter. What we are saying, well, this suggestion would seem to be supported by looking at the Greek behind the text in John 21. I've just put here on the screen, you can see the three questions and the Greek word being used. And indeed, it is that Jesus asks with agape in the first two questions, and Peter replies with phileo. And then when we get to the third question, both Jesus and Peter are using phileo, and it would seem therefore to be as we might say, a slam dunk argument. Jesus has moved from using agape to phileo. He has downgraded the level of love that he is requiring from Peter. Nonetheless, there are reasons why we should be suspicious of this line of thinking, and quite clear reasons why nearly all Bible translators will simply use the same English word, love, for each of the questions, and very few Bible commentators will find it a worthy distinction to make. One reason is that Jesus and Peter were probably speaking Aramaic at this point, and Aramaic only has one word, one basic word for love, as Hebrew, which is a very similar language, also does. And in fact, when we look at the Greek translation of the Old Testament, both agape and phileo are used interchangeably to translate the same Hebrew word for love. So when Jesus was chatting with Peter in Aramaic, they were probably just using the same word. Another important reason is that by the time of Jesus, the distinction between agape and phileo seems to have been no longer so important, especially in everyday Greek, where both terms would be used interchangeably. And in fact, this is something that we see in John's Gospel, that agape and phileo are used virtually as synonyms to describe the same realities, as we can see by the following examples. Therefore, if you were to go into John's Gospel, you would see that, and into the Greek, you would see that agape and phileo are used both to describe God's love for humans, the Father's love for the Son, Jesus' love for humans, love between humans, and the love of humans for Jesus. So in the end, we're probably best off keeping our interpretation of this passage simple. Jesus and Peter are walking together, speaking Aramaic. Jesus asks Peter 3 times if Peter loves him. And Peter is dismayed by the repetition of the question 3 times, because it is a reminder of the 3 times that he has denied Jesus. When he writes up the account in the Gospel in Greek, the author uses agape and phileo interchangeably for stylistic reasons, probably just to avoid too much repetition.